Now, there are two cars that whenever we talk about on our website, YouTube, social channels, you guys go into complete meltdown about.
Yeah, it sends absolutely everything bonkers.
It's the MG4
and the new Kia Niro EV.
Now, before we go into a discussion of would you rather, remember to subscribe to our channel, because if you love electric cars, there is only one place to be.
And that's right here.
Now, this is a bit of a head scratcher. And I'm not going to tell you the ending because otherwise there'd be no point in watching this video. But these two cars are really similar, and that has to be a good thing. I think this is a bit of a battle royale because the electric Kia Niro was the second best selling electric car last year, second to the Tesla Model 3. However, this year, MG says this MG4 are going to surpass those kind of sales figures. So I think it might have met its match.
Now, that is quite bold, isn't it? I mean, that's punchy coming from MG, but I have to say that out of these two, I would actually be quite happy with either of them, right?
Yeah, agreed.
But there are, once you start digging into the details, a couple of things that might just happen to be deal breakers. Price! That might sway you one way or the other. So let us know in the comments immediately, which one would you prefer?
We'll leave Wookie to remove the frog from his throat and get talking about this car, because we are here talking about the Kia Niro EV. Now, this is actually a modern, cleaner, fresher looking of an old electrifying favourite, the Kia e-Niro. And I cannot wait to compare it to the MG4.
Yeah, and this is the brand new MG4. It's a new model from MG, this time showcasing a lot of style in that it actually has some this time, and value for money, a load of new tech. I know that you actually really like this one, don't you?
I do, but stop trying to guess the ending. Don't give anything away.
Right, let's start with first things first, and this, the MG4. Now, I have always quite liked electric MGs, but they were never really super stylish, now were they? But this car actually has changed the game for MG, in my opinion. I looked at it and I'm not stunned. I don't think it's the best looking car in the world. In fact, I think it looks a little bit like a Nissan Leaf's weird cousin with a bit of EV6 that had an affair somewhere along its sort of timeline. But it is distinctive, and I do like the way it looks. I
think this is worlds apart from what we've seen from MG in the past. I mean, the ZS review that I did a couple of months back, that I got absolutely slated for being far too honest about the way it looked.
She did get quite a few good comments when she last reviewed an MG ZS, I will say that.
Yes, I was a bit too honest, I think. But come on, it was not a stylish car. Whereas this, they've completely rewritten the rulebook with it. I think it's absolutely, I'm going to go, gorgeous, darling.
Wow, that is high praise indeed. And the other thing, it's like we were talking about it earlier, weren't we? This is just a normal sort of 5-seat hatchback. It's quite a normal size.
Yeah.
It's not massively raised up, and it's not called an SUV. It's quite nice.
No, which I do think is a phrase that is overused quite a lot for some cars that are not of SUV size. I guess this is just like a traditional 5-seater hatchback. Also worth noting though, it's quite modest in terms of size. This is basically the same size as an ID3.
Does that mean you don't like the way that the Kia Niro EV looks? Because I happen to think that this looks so super modern, it makes the MG4 look slightly old-fashioned already.
Well, actually, no, it's not, because I like it because it's more like a proper SUV, so it is a bit bigger. It's also packed full of kind of Kia's latest and greatest innovations and technology. So yeah, I think it is super stylish, and I do think it's a big step up from the last version. So, you know, again, massive credit to Kia for the sort of the design and the styling of this car. One thing, bit of a fun fact for you, do you want to know?
I do live for fun facts.
Good, excellent. Is that this, in the long range, even though it's a smaller car, is heavier.
Okay, so that is a fun fact, and it means that the MG4 is extremely dense, but there is more to talk about. Let's go for interiors.
Nice.
I quite like the MG4's interior. It's practical rather than sexy, but actually everything you need is here. It's got this rectangular information screen in front of the driver, which does look a little bit plonked in there, but then the normal sort of touchscreen, big rectangle in the middle. Underneath are some commonly used buttons, but they look kind of play schooly. They're a bit big and blocky, so they're a bit odd. And the steering wheel is not round, and you think that'd feel weird, but actually it's quite nice when you're driving. Then it's got this kind of weird jutting out shelf, which I thought I'd bang my knees on, but I actually don't, that contains the rotary drive selector and the electric handbrake. Now in this top spec model, this is a trophy. This bit here, this little shelf, is a wireless charging pad for your mobile phone. In the other cars, the lower spec cars, that's just a shelf, which is quite shallow. So when you go around a corner, your phone might drop off. But if you are charging stuff, it's got these holes for the cables, which go through the top of the shelf and then plug in down here where the actual charge ports are. Now, once you've got things on it, it looks okay. But when there's nothing there, you get a load of cables. It's slightly odd. And then down here, you do get where the actual USB ports are, a couple of cup holders. Again, much more space down here because this is an electric car. Big shelf that you can cover up, and then there's another deep door bin here. A couple of things that I don't like. Again, I've mentioned the buttons. They're a little bit cheap looking. The seats don't feel like they've got enough lumbar support, and because I'm a little bit heavier than people like Nikki and Ginny, I feel like I'm sat through the seat. So the seats feel a little bit cheap, but you do get half leather on this Trophy. Generally though, it feels nicely practical. The materials are all right. This is all pretty good.
There's good enough space in the back, and the boot is big enough, but again, not exactly a cave at 363 litres. A tiny bit smaller than an average hatch.
Well, I think the Nero really stands up here because it has a much bigger boot, 475 litres, not to be sniffed at, plus it's much bigger in the back as well. Let's take a look at the interior inside the Kia. I think first of all you can see that this is overall a nicer place to be than the MG4. I love the steering wheel, plenty of information at your fingertips while driving. The one thing you will notice immediately though is this is the entry level, the 2.0. And the display screen is the smallest one, so you have a massive gap with nothing going on here in the middle, which isn't ideal. You also have these buttons that do nothing. These are obviously just placeholders for what should go there if you get the higher spec model, which is just an annoying reminder that you're a bit of a cheapskate and didn't pay for the extras. So I think that's a bit frustrating. They're down here in the centre console and also around here at the side. You've got the haptic buttons along the bar in the middle here, which is actually really nice. Oh, bit of smooth radio on there. I didn't tune the radio station, I promise. This isn't a bespoke electric car, so what does that mean? It means you still have the space for the transmission tunnel. So there is no empty gap here for your handbag, which again, it's just a little niggle. It's not a game changer. It's not going to make a decision on whether you buy it or not, but it's just something that's missing from this car. Also worth noting, on the 2.0, you only get fabric seats, so you have to upgrade to get the vegan leather. No heated steering wheel, of course. And unfortunately, the seats are manual only. No power assisted seats in this trim.
It is worth noting though that you only get all of the spec when you move to the more expensive Trophy version. So if you want powered seats, you've got to have the Trophy. If you want a heated steering wheel or heated seats, you've got to have the Trophy version. If you want the double rear spoiler, that's only on the Trophy. If you want rear privacy glass, again, only on the Trophy. The SE and the lower spec cars aren't badly equipped, but it is the top spec Trophy that gets all the toys.
Ha! The Nero does too, but you are right. There's less standard kit on the Kia if we are being picky. But for all the actual specs, please do have a look at electrifying.com and you can check them out for yourself. No standard heated seats though until you get to the more expensive Trophy version of the MG4, I notice. That's got to be a no from me.
Well, it would be until you realise that a full house MG4 Trophy is still less money than a base Nero EV. But more on that later. First, we must drive.
Now this really is quite a pleasant surprise because this MG4 really does feel quite nippy. It's got just over 200 brake horsepower and 184 pounds-feet of torque, and it feels nicely quick without being stupidly ballistic. 0 to 62 miles an hour takes just under 8 seconds, and I think it's actually quite well judged because it gets down the road really nicely without smashing your head back off the headrests. Plus, it's actually rear-wheel drive, and it's got a very, very quick steering rack. Now that makes the car feel like it reacts really nicely when you put your inputs in. I was surprised that they made it this positive because sometimes that can put people off. It makes a car feel slightly nervous if you do it wrong. But in the MG4, it just makes it feel reactive and actually quite good fun to drive. The weird thing is it always feels just that little bit sporty, even if it's not supposed to. It's not intrusive, but it makes the car feel like it reacts really quickly, really pleasantly. Especially when you're in town, actually, I noticed it quite a lot. It feels like you can get into a gap, especially with electric power. The steering's quick, the car feels quite small. This isn't like most of those big electric SUVs that feel quite heavy and big and ponderous. This feels like a little nippy city car. That's pretty good. There are 5 driving modes. You have to access them through the screen, which is a little bit annoying. I would have preferred the button, but you get Snow, Eco, Normal, Sport and Custom, which allows you to sort of aggregate all your own personal settings. As ever, you will probably only use 2, which are Normal and Eco. Well, that tend to be what I use anyway. And they all work very well. Things that I don't like? Well, actually, this is a niggly thing, but the soundproofing for the suspension is a little bit weak. So you can hear the suspension sort of booming and moving around a little bit. It's not hugely intrusive, but you do notice it. And it rides really well, sort of 85% of the time. You hit the odd bump and you really hear it thumping. And over rough surfaces, you do get, again, a bit of a booming from the wheel arches. So it can be something you notice. One thing against the Niro I keep thinking is that it feels really small. Look, I'm going to do a 3-point turn here. And really good turning circle. And everything just feels that little bit smaller. It feels like a nippy car, and it also feels a lot lower than the Niro. I realise that it's a different body style, but this car feels more like a conventionally engined car than an electric one, albeit very fast and very put together and really quite quiet.
As I am with the Niro EV, if I'm honest. I think this car just feels right in pretty much every area, and just like the MG, it has just over 200 brake horsepower with a similar 188 pounds per foot of torque. There is just a single digit difference in power and torque between these two, so it's really close. Also, this gets from 0 to 62 miles per hour in just under 8 seconds, so it's fast, it's nippy, it's plenty, it's exactly what you need. It's quite interesting. I think all manufacturers seem to have concluded what the sort of ideal amount of power is and then just stuck with it, because so many cars that are coming out at the moment seem to all be pitched at around the 200 brake horsepower mark. Now, in terms of your sort of driving position, you do sit slightly higher on the road, which again, I like. This is also front wheel drive. I would say that the steering is a little bit slower. It's not quite as direct as the MG4, so I think it's just naturally calmer, which is no bad thing. I quite like the idea of when you're driving, it's a time for chilling out and not being some sort of like speedy, aggressive driver, rookie. So yeah, I like that in terms of the driving style, but I think it's very much a personal preference. The MG4 is probably a bit more dynamic, a bit more direct. That's going to suit someone like my brother who likes a sporty drive. However, my mum, who likes a slightly calmer, more relaxing drive, this would suit her. So I think, you know, it's not a bad thing that this is a calmer and less responsive drive. So I think it's all about personal preference, isn't it? You know, what suits your driving style. You know, also saying all of that, this doesn't hang around at a roundabout. You know, this is a very well-balanced car. And the final secret weapon that this car has is regen pedals. It's the simple things in life. I do get a lot of pleasure from changing my regen mode using paddles behind the steering wheel. I really do. It just makes it so simple, so easy. You know what you're doing, it's there. Whereas I know for a fact that the MG doesn't have them.
Nope, but the MG does have brake regen, and you can just program a spare button on the steering wheel to cycle through the modes. I knew you'd bring that up.
Ah, yes, true. But Wiki, you have the time, the inclination to program that button to be regen, which is actually something that my brother would do, back to the point I was saying earlier, whereas that is not something that my mum is going to do, is she? She is going to get in the car and want it set up, ready to rock, without having to faff around programming regen into a button.
This is the MG4 long range, so that means we get a 61.7 kilowatt-hour battery with a possible 270 miles of range on the standard WLTP cycle, which is pretty damn usable for most people. There's 125 kilowatt DC charging, meaning you'll add about 155 miles 10 to 80% in 34 minutes on a big enough public charger. And it'll take about 68 minutes on a smaller 50 kilowatt. Oh, and you're looking at a 10-hour charge flat to full on a usual home charger and 7.4 kilowatt AC charging. So nothing bonkers, but absolutely on point for this kind of car. It's nicely competitive.
The Niro, on the other hand, has a slightly bigger battery at 64.8 kilowatt hours and ever so slightly more range with 285 miles on the standard tests, which is good, but it's only got 80 kilowatt DC charging. So it's going to take 45 minutes to get from 10 to 80% on a public charger. That's 11 minutes slower than the MG4, for not a lot more distance. It's roughly the same, bit quicker to charge on a 50 kilowatt, and also gets 11 kilowatt AC charging. So there's a bit of give and take here. 10.5 hours on a home wall box. So again, fairly similar, but to be honest, the MG looks to be on the front foot when it comes to juicing up.
Okay, so I think we better address the elephant in the room here, price, because that's where I think it all comes crashing down for the Niro EV, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, you're probably right. This car is excellent. It's practical, it's spacious, it's got all the bits that you need in a car. You know, there's some decent technology in here. However, yeah, price is a bit of a killer point, isn't it?
Yep, because the longer range MG4 starts at £28,495 for the SE and tops out at £31,495 for the fully spec trophy version like this one. There's also a smaller batteried car that's even cheaper, and that is outstanding value.
Yeah, especially when the Kia Niro EV starts at £36,245 and goes over 42 grand for the heavily equipped 4 model. Over £10,000 difference between the top models.
It's the same story if you're buying on finance. Now that's got a lot to do with residual value. The MG4 has been predicted residual values which are getting to be nearly as good in percentage terms as the Porsche Taycan, which means that it's worth more when it comes time to sell, which in turn means it'll be very reasonable on a lease deal. Even from MG itself at the moment, you're looking at £350 a month with £4 grand deposit.
Yep, that's proper. And MG actually says it's got cars for sale while there is still a waiting list for the Niro EV, which is not a small thing. And you know, we always talk about Kia's 7-year warranty being brilliant, and you can pass it on to the next owner and all that kind of stuff. Well, MG's warranty now matches it.
Oh, that's impressive. So basically what we're saying is, unless space is really important to you, or perhaps you've fallen in love with the Niro's styling, then actually your best bet at the moment is going to be the MG4. Okay, there is slightly less space, but it has the same range and even better charging.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing here is a big Chinese company, because MG is actually owned by a massive Chinese megacorp called SAIC. They've come into this market, they've decided to price a car really aggressively with loads of equipment, with a decent warranty, in order to get that foothold in the UK market. They are pricing this car to win.
Yeah, nice. And from what we've seen so far, they're doing a
They're
really
doing
good
it,
job.
yeah, exactly.
They are definitely on that road to winning. Okay, so I guess it comes down to it. I think I know the answer, but what's it going to be, Mr. Tom Ford?
I would go, because I'm cheap, I would go for an MG4.
Fine. I am finding this decision really, really difficult, because I started off this review thinking it's got to be the MG4, right? I mean, it's just such good value for that amount of car. But if it's going to be my one family car, right, space to me is actually really important. 2 kids, lots of stuff. So I think, you know, this gets an extra 25% in terms of boot capacity, which is quite a lot. Also with the charging, I don't really use superchargers that much.
That's
Therefore, it's not really a sort of a benefit to me. So in this occasion, because I've got more money than you anyway, Tom.
Well, that's not untrue, is it?
I'm going to go with the Kia Niro EV for me.
Proper consumer advice there, it'll never catch on. If you do want to know more about either of the 2 cars featured in this video, the competitors or any of the specs, then please do visit electrifying.com and we'll help you with the details.